Studying for this, I was really reminded of the last message in this series, War on the Family, and how Satan attacks the two foundations, the two pillars of the family, which is the husband and the wife, mom and dad. You have these two pillars in the family, and Satan specifically, I believe, targets those pillars because if you take out the foundation, then the rest of the building crumbles fairly quickly. You take out those load-bearing walls and the building stumbles or falls pretty fast. And as I was getting ready for this and this message, I was reminded of the first one. So the last message I did, and it's been a little while now here, was the responsibility of the godly husband. And I go back and I think as I was preparing for that, and that week, I remembered that that week of the final week before the message, the motor on our car went out. And I was like, well, now I'll have to sell it and get a different car. So we did that, no big deal. And it was kind of a difficult week. And then last week, as I'm getting ready for the second part of this session to talk about the supportive wife, then the new car that we just bought, the motor goes out on the car. And so then you wonder how much spiritual warfare. Now, I'm not giving Satan enough credit to say that he can do that to you. I'm not going to give him that kind of power. I don't believe he has that kind of power. But I believe it tests you, and it did me, to see, okay, well, where is my joy going to come from? Is my joy found in Christ? And am I going to let this totally distract me and keep me from doing what I know is right? Or am I going to just press forward and say, you know what? I'm going to be all right. We're going to make it through this. And so I just figure that amount of spiritual warfare, I think, is something that's really real in our lives. I think when we're getting ready to do something we're going to go out and we're going to share, or we're going to visit with somebody that we know needs encouragement, a lot of the times we have these kinds of things pop up in our lives, and a lot of the times, instead of pressing forward, we turn around and go back because now I have something else to take care of. And I believe Satan wants to do that to us, but not this time. Well, just a little bit of a refresher on the godly husband, the responsibility of the godly husband. Satan's goal, as we talked about the two foundations, the pillars of a marriage, the pillars of the family, the husband and the wife, if he can attack those two, or even turn one against the other, or turn them both against each other, then he has so much more power over the children of the family. He has a door into your children's lives as well. And so as a husband, it's important for us to make sure that we stand guard, that we're ready for this, that we protect our families spiritually, and that we ensure that they're spiritually healthy. And so we talked a little bit about this going back to Genesis chapter 3, and we don't want to go back there today because we'll run out of time. But we talked about how God instituted marriage. God is the one that designed marriage. God is the one that said, it's not good for man to be alone, and God is the one that made a woman for man. God designed marriage. And if we want to do marriage right, then we go back to the designer of it and say, okay, well, how did you make it? How did you want this to work? Because that's the right way to use it. We buy stuff in the store, and if we want it to work like it was made to work, then we read the instructions of the creator of that device. And marriage is the same way. And so we talked about how God attacks the husbands in the family, and we're going to kind of skip over that, and how there's a natural kind of a friction between a husband and a wife. The roles of the husband, and now this is going to be important here. We talked about husbands, love your wives. Okay, you remember that? And not love your wives like you love donuts, but you love your wife like God wants you and desires for you to love your wife. And there's a difference. We love a lot of things. Some of us love football. But if I love football, it should not be the same type of love that I give to my wife. It should be a different type of love. And so some of us love donuts, but you should love your wife more than donuts. So we're going to move on to the godly, supportive wife today. This is something that is difficult for me to maybe speak on. I feel like a lot of times when it comes to women and wives, most of the time, we as men up here speaking to you don't want to say anything bad about women and wives. So you have Mother's Day sermons where all we do is we praise women, we thank them for how hard they work, and all of that is true. We say, well, if they got paid for everything they did, if they're a doctor and they're a nurse and they're a maid and they're a cleaner, if they got paid all of that, it would be so much. And all of that is true. But I sometimes think we don't see the other side of the things that maybe we should work on and how Satan attacks women specifically, wives specifically. When it comes to families, you have specific roles designed by God, the creator of a marriage, the creator of the family. You as a wife have a specific job that God created you for. And when we don't do that job the way it was created, we have problems. And so we're going to talk about some of them today. Now, I don't have experience being a wife. God didn't create me that way. So I maybe won't understand everything the way that you would as women. And so I know last time I said women, you could elbow your husbands, or wives, you could elbow your husband if you were sitting beside him. Well, today it's the other way around. So husbands, get your elbows ready. So I hope it's something that we can learn from. Something that we can use, both of these, to strengthen our families. Something to where we can take this home and say, okay, how am I as a wife going to be a support to you? Or how am I as a husband going to show you love that you need? How does that work together? And how can we together, doing both of those things, how does that strengthen our marriage, our relationship, first of all, with each other, then with God, and then we can pass that on to our children. Then, and only then can we rightly pass that on to our children. Because if wives and husbands, if you are fighting with each other, you cannot biblically accurately teach your children what it looks like to portray godly love or godly respect. Because you're not showing it. Or forgiveness for that matter. If you can't forgive your wife or your husband for something that happened or a mistake that was made, how can you teach your children that? See, and Satan loves that part of it. He knows that the kids are going to learn from mom and dad. So if I can just turn mom and dad against each other, I don't really need to do much with the children. They're going to walk away on their own because of what they've seen from their parents. So it's super important that the pillars of a marriage, the pillars of the family, excluding God, of course, but that they are working together. So, how does Satan specifically attack wives today? Well, you might, as women, you might hear these things and you might think these things about yourself or to yourself. Somebody might even have said it to you. So here's just a few. Well, men just want to control you. You have women today they go all over the country and they preach this feministic ideology about how the men in this country, they just want to control the women. They want you to feel like you're less, you're underneath them. All they want to do is control you. You hear that. Well, if I was to hear, hey, somebody wants to control you, well, the first thing I would do is I would brace myself. That's not going to happen. See, if you're listening to the wrong person and somebody says, well, the men just want to control us, we're not going to let them. You're bracing yourself to go at war or to war with your husband. So we need to be careful when we hear these types of things. Now, I'm not saying there aren't husbands or men that do control women in a negative way. That's not right. But that's that husband, that man's issue then. That's his sin. Let's not make it our own. The next one is, you can do better than your husband, or you can do it better than your husband. Wives, women, you might think very little of your man, of your husband. And husbands, and we're going to get into this a little bit either, we as men we might be strong, and we might not cry easily, but our egos are very soft and weak. They get damaged real easily. And you sometimes think, well, you know what? I'm just going to do it because I can do it better. I know it should be his job, but I can do it so much better than he can. So I'm just going to do it. That's another thing that you hear. You might hear, or Satan wants you to believe, that you're not as important as your husband. Biblically, this is not true. This is not true biblically. You are equally important to your husband. And young people, this goes for you too. I mean, you're equals. And so, guys, if you're looking for a wife, you want to look for a wife that's going to be supportive to you. But you also want to make sure that you can show the love like we talked about in the last part of this session. Women often hear that you're worthless. You're not worth anything. And we hear this, a lot of times women hear this not from specifically men, but maybe from other women. Or maybe there's a comparison factor where you compare yourself to other women and you say, well, I'm not like her, therefore I'm not worth very much. Or I can't do what she does, so I'm not worth as much. Or, she's able to keep the house clean, she has 3 kids, and she's able to do all of that, and she can bake all the time, and I just can't do that. And on the side, she has a part-time job. And here I am, and I struggle to just keep the house clean. And so then you let Satan tell you that you're worthless. And this kind of ties together with that, but you're not beautiful. See, as guys, I don't think we struggle with mizet so shmakostian, but women, Satan understands that your appearance is important to you. And guys are very appreciative of that. But he also uses that against you. Where you begin to think and compare yourself to other women and say, well, I don't look like her, now I'm not beautiful. And he lowers your self-esteem in the way that you feel about yourself. And you will never be a godly wife that can support your husband if you let Satan totally crush your self-value. If you don't feel you're important and if you don't feel good about yourself, how do you expect your husband to? These are lies that Satan wants you to believe. Your husband will never change. Some of you wives have husbands who might not be living godly lives. And Satan wants you to believe that there's no hope for him. No matter what you do, he's never going to change. You've probably tried all kinds of different things. You've probably prayed for him for years already, but he's never going to change. There's no hope for him. He wants you to believe that now. 1 Peter, I think chapter 3, would have some advice to you if that's a situation you're living in. 1 Peter chapter 3, I think specifically the first 3 verses. And I don't think we're going to get to that today. And then the last one that I've listed here, and these are just some, and you might not all be struggling with all of them, but maybe you've experienced some of them. And I'm confident in saying that most women probably have heard some of these struggles or believed some of these attacks. And that is that you need to be in charge. This kind of ties together with the first one. For whatever reason, you feel like, well, my husband isn't capable of leading. My husband, he just can't do it. I know he tries, maybe he does, maybe he doesn't, but he just can't do it, so I need to be in charge. Maybe that's the finances, maybe that's where you go, how you spend your days, your whole month planned out. You need to be in charge. And sometimes you don't know why. Why does my husband not lead? Why does he not just take the reins and do something? And you say, well, Satan tells you, well, you have to do it because he's not going to. Or maybe he can't. Or maybe he doesn't want to, so you have to. These are attacks that Satan has or does to the wives, to women today. Not just wives, but looking specifically at the family. This is going to be geared more towards wives, but young ladies, this would apply equally to you. These are struggles that you may face that the young men around you may not. They might be a little bit different. Now, some of them probably go together. The next thing is, Some things are natural for women and for wives. Now, these things may not all be easy for you. This is not a stereotype. Some of these might be natural for you and some may not. But some things that are natural for a wife within a marriage is some women love cleaning. They just love to clean the home. Others, they love cooking. Some love shopping. And I don't know if you're lucky enough to have a man that loves shopping, but most men don't. Talking about emotional things. So when you have women gather in a place, they talk about how they feel. They talk about feelings in their lives, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you get men together, and we're probably not going to talk about how we feel and how somebody said something and I feel sad. That's probably not a conversation that a group of men are going to have, but a group of women, it's more likely. Again, not all, but it's more likely. Showing love to your husband. It's easier for a woman to show love to her husband than it is for a husband to show love to his wife. Partly because women are harder to understand. But it's true. Women, it just comes easy to them. I don't know. My wife, she just knows how to show me that she loves me. It's almost like it's natural for her. And for me, like if I'm supposed to, we're supposed to talk about some things, it just feels so, like I don't know how to start about, what do I say? How do I even say this? It just feels awkward in a way. It's hard to express love for me. But for her, it's easy. Nourishing your children. Wives grow up and moms, it's so easy for you just to raise your kids. And so we have our two. And if I'm supposed to spend a whole day with him at home and Eva's off somewhere else, like at the end of the day, I'm tired. Like I don't know how she does it because they're constantly running from one end of the house to the other end of the house. And they're throwing this stuff around. And then you clean it up. And then pretty soon they're throwing it around again. And then you clean it up and they throw it around again. All day that happens. And my wife is just calm at home, like nothing's happening, and I'm going crazy inside. But for women, this is a more natural, like it's a more nourishing your children is just something that I think God has kind of ingrained into you. Now, this is not everyone, okay? This is not a stereotype. And then the last one is the showing emotion part. Women show emotion easier than men. Some men show emotion too, rather easily. And there's nothing wrong with that. But these are things that are natural for you. And so these are some gifts, the way that God has created you, use those things. But Satan, I think, attacks these things too. As a wife, he uses the things that may become natural to you and say, well, you can't do the same thing as the men do. The feministic movement is all about being equal with the man, doing the exact same things as a man does. God didn't create us that way. God didn't create you as a wife to be exactly like your husband. We often say, if you did, you wouldn't need him. You wouldn't need him. You're created differently, with different gifts to fit different needs in the home. But those needs aren't less important than what your husband's needs in the home are. They're equally important. So what's not easy then for most women? We're going to get into some scripture here in just a little bit. But respecting your husband unconditionally. In the Bible, can anyone tell me how many times, and maybe I'm jumping ahead here, how many times in the Bible does God command a woman to love her husband? Does anybody know? Okay, just one. Okay, do you know where it's at? Okay. The closest we get, and I think you're right, is Titus. And he specifically says, to the older women, teach the younger women how to love your husbands. It's the only one. So he's not even telling one woman specifically or saying, wives, love your husbands. He never says that. He does say older women teach the younger women how to love. But never do you find wives love your husbands. Why? Because it's natural. You know how to love. That's why we find Ephesians 5, we'll read that again. But husbands, love your wives. Well, we hear that all over the place. That's clear to us. I mean, that the scriptures is full of, for us as husbands, we are to love because that's not an easy thing for us to do. But now, if the scriptures, if God's word would say, husbands, respect your wives, well, that would be a lot easier for us as men. But wives, for you to respect your husbands seems to be harder than loving them. Seems to be harder than loving them. And I like using the word unconditionally. We talk a lot about husbands unconditionally love your wives. No matter what they do, love them. They may not be perfect, but still love them. Well, wives, I think the same thing applies to you. Respect your husbands no matter what. They may not even deserve your respect. They may not even have earned your respect. But Ephesians 5, let's go there. Ephesians 5:33. This is a command to you. Respect your husbands. And now I know I'm jumping ahead, but we're going to go there. So Ephesians 5, verse 33. However, each one of you also must love his wife, okay, that's us as husbands, as he loves himself. And here's the second part. And the wife must respect her husband. And that's it. Okay, he doesn't say the wife must respect her husband if the husband has earned your respect. It's not what it says. It says the wife must respect her husband, period, the end. See, now you as wives oftentimes want to put conditions here. I see it. Whether counseling or visiting with people, I see that the women want to respect their husbands only if the husband deserves it. Only if the husband loves her the right way. Only if the husband loves her or changes his ways, then I will respect him. That's not what the Bible teaches. You may not hear this in a lot of places, but wives are called by God to respect your husbands, period. If for nothing else, then that he is your husband. Respect him in that sense. And we'll look at ways that that's hard here just a little bit later on. But respect your husbands. Well, and husbands, love your wives. This goes for you too. No matter what she does, you have to love her. You should love her even though she's not perfect. When she makes a mistake, you still love her. You don't stop loving her. And we talk about that a lot. But wives, respect your husbands even when he makes a mistake.